Hi, welcome back. Well, if you have maybe early teens or late primary school boy in your house, they might be interested in this book. And in the studio with me, I have Ken Vogel, who wrote it. The Fighter, Ken. Sounds pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, well, that was the name given to this boy. It wasn't his actual name, but all of his village people called him the Fighter, and so
Piari was his name.
Piari, that's right.
So Paul Piari was a pastor that you met in the 1980s. This is something we have in common, Ken. I lived in PNG in the 1980s, and so did you. But
yes,
while I was on the palm-fringed coastal islands, you were up in the Highlands, where people are known for being fairly warlike, aren't they?
In the Yenga province, it was very bad tribal fighting, and Pastor Paul Piari was one of the pastors I worked with, and so he told me the story of his life journey, and I was just intrigued with his childhood and leading up to his conversion. It was a fascinating story. It took 30 years to get it from him telling me to where it is today, but I hope and pray that someone, particularly young people, will actually pick up this book and learn about the God that Piari learned.
Wow. So is Piari still alive today?
No, sadly, in 2010 he died. He was an old man in Port Moresby and had a car accident. A car hit him when he was a pedestrian, and sadly he's deceased.
Yeah, but a number of family members of his helped you in sort of fleshing out some of the details.
Well, to start with, he did, but then, of course, once he passed away, then his family continued. There were sometimes differences in memory, but I went back to the tapes of the interview, which gave me then the impetus to keep going.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, you were telling me something really interesting just before the interview. Now, I always had this picture of the traditional religions of Papua New Guinea as being very, we could use very loaded terms like heathen or pagan or whatever. Right. But you painted quite a different picture.
Absolutely. This book tells the story of the great controversy. We think of that in terms of the Bible story, but actually the great controversy
as in
between God and Satan, between good and bad.
Yeah, okay.
And this story starts well before the Christian missionaries ever came to Papua New Guinea, and yet here in those days we find the belief in a personal God.
Wow.
But of course there were many, in fact the majority, that still had superstition and fears, but Piari's father believed in a personal God. He trusted this God. He knew that this God who lived in the land of mystery loved him and wanted the best for him. So there was this great controversy even in those times, and Piari was caught in the middle. He loved the fighting, and yet his father was saying, no, fighting's bad. The God from the land of mystery doesn't want us to fight. And so you've got this conflict even within the tribal customs and beliefs of the day.
That's really interesting from an anthropology point of view.
Absolutely.
Because so many times I read Indigenous legends or customs, and I think that really strongly echoes, biblical stories. It happens again and again, but I never knew it was in PNG.
Exactly. And one person, an adult who read this recently, said to me, I can handle most of this stuff, but the angel story, I'm really struggling with that, because Piari had actually seen angels as a boy, and angels used to sing and used to come to them, and whenever something really bad happened, they would feel very sad and they would disappear, and so he knew angels, and so when the Christian missionaries came along and taught about angels from the Bible, it was no big deal. Of course, we accept that. What's new?
Yeah, and to this day, people in Papua New Guinea, which is overwhelmingly a Christian nation,
correct,
continue to be a very spiritual people, don't they? Very aware of the spiritual world around them.
Very much so.
Wow, that's incredible. So, boy, have you written books before, or is this sort of your first?
This is my first, Kent, yes. Yeah. But I felt I owed it to Paul, but also to young people to write this story up. In Australia, for example, we tend to lose the males from our church in their late teens and early 20s, and if I can ground them in these sorts of narratives and get them interested to read and to find out that God really cares about them, that He really wants them, if they can make some good, firm decisions in those days, then maybe we won't be losing so many.
Some people, I guess, criticise the culture of churches in Australia, and they say, they use words like feminised, which is obviously a very loaded term, and they say we're a bit soft. It's all about music and singing and being nice and kind to one another, and this sort of doesn't engage boys.
Well, this book is written, girls will enjoy it, I guess, but really this is designed for boys. because it's a boy's story. And it's
have you had any sort of young guys in sort of 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 who've read it and have told you about it?
Well, I have, but mostly before I actually wrote it, I told the stories. I'm probably more of a storyteller than I am of a writer, and so I told the stories, and boys were just intrigued with them.
I find it incredible that Papua New Guinea is our closest neighbour geographically, and it's one of the least known and least understood countries for Australians.
It's true.
How has that happened, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. But look, in the book, what I've tried to do as well, I've put fact files in there so that it actually, as well as the narrative of the story, that you can actually learn things about Papua New Guinea, about the geography, about the people, about the culture. And then towards the end there, where the story starts to introduce the Christian missionaries, I start bringing some of the facts about our own mission background so that the readers actually go away from this, yes, warmed that God loves them and wants them, but also they actually have some facts about this neighbour of ours and the history of God's missionary work through his church.
Okay. So when you were there in the Enga province, were you personally aware of this sort of tribal tension and warfare around you?
Yeah, where we lived, there was deaths nearly every week from tribal fighting. I was away flying our mission aircraft a lot, and my wife was on her own with the 2 young ones. And the thing that probably hurt her most in our time there was just the attitude towards life, the killing that was going on. That hurt her. She's a gentle, caring person, and that was a fairly traumatic experience for her.
Okay, and now that, as I was saying before, Christianity is overwhelmingly the religion of Papua New Guinea, is that tribal fighting ended or reduced?
No, it continues because
to the same extent, would you say? Or?
Well, sadly these days the modern weaponry are being used. In our day it wasn't. It was probably just beginning to transition.
So sort of spears and bows and arrows.
As the photo on the front there, the spears, the bows and arrows. In our day they were using machetes as well and axes. Of course axes were also used in the traditional times.
But firearms now...
Yeah. It's pretty sad.
Wow. Do you think the churches have a role in
absolutely.
dealing with that sort of stuff?
And the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I'm proud to say, does stand up and say this is totally unacceptable, as Piari's dad did. Piari's dad said fighting is bad, fighting is wrong. God does not want us to fight. And so the Christian church should be saying the same thing as Piari's dad said. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church is making that statement, but some Christian churches haven't stood as strongly, and I'm sad about that.
Wow. Well, look, it's an incredible book, and as I said before, if you have a young man in your house particularly, he will probably find this fascinating and engaging, and as well as educational. That sounds boring, doesn't it? But he will learn a lot and be inspired. Thanks so much, Ken. I really appreciate you coming in to talk to us about your book.
A pleasure.
We'll see you after the break.